Didn't figure this guy for a bookworm. That's one way to get yourself shot. So, you after this guy too, or just here to catch some demons? Silent type, huh? Well, that's annoying. Too much for friendly banter. You wanna fight? Come on.
In the short time I've been acquainted with it, I've become a big fan of the Devil May Cry series. Unique and memorable characters, intensely difficult and immensely satisfying, Devil May Cry 1 and 3 stand as benchmarks of the character action game genre in every way possible. There's a nearly insurmountable skill ceiling that shoves you, like it or not, into constantly improving the way you play until you've mastered its mechanics. One can only hope they remain well-remembered classics in the years to come. So, here we are. The final, at least until March, mainline entry in the Devil May Cry series, Devil May Cry 4. Could it possibly, while simultaneously juggling a whole new protagonist, wrapping up the story of the previous protagonist, and trying to shake up the gameplay formula, live up to Devil May Cry 3? No. And maybe it wasn't so reasonable to expect it to. However, despite its poor pacing, bad story, repetitive levels, samey enemies, and easy bosses, DMC4 is still a good game. How good? Let's talk about it.
Yep. This is gonna get ugly. Huh?
The game starts and we're introduced to our brand spanking new protagonist, Nero, trying to make it in time to his more than friend Kyrie's opera recital, killing a gang of puppet-like demons along the way. After the performance, something unexpected happens. Dante, the iconic devil hunter and long-standing main character of the series, bursts through the cathedral window and murders the leader of this seemingly peaceful religion. Mass panic ensues and Nero is left to face off against this mysterious assailant before he stylishly makes his exit.
What are you talking about? You will come to learn the meaning soon enough. But business beckons. Hey! Adios, kid.
Nero is tasked with hunting him down, but not before the city is invaded by an army of demons. The plot starts you off with a ton of intriguing questions. Why did Dante do the thing Dante just did? What's up with this religion that evidently worships the demon Sparta? Why are there suddenly droves of these puppet-like devils? Why does Nero have an otherworldly appendage? These questions made the first couple missions exciting as you got to speculate what the answers might be. It's a strong start to an overall underwhelming plot, marred first and foremost by the brick wall the pacing runs into after the first couple missions. Fortuna Castle is a big, backtrack-heavy, puzzle-filled, gothic-themed area that obviously suits the DMC series, but introducing it just 3 missions in undermines the urgency of the story and is therefore boring compared to what came before it. There definitely needed to be a smoother transition between the simple, linear, and fast-flowing level design of the 2 stages prior and the slow puzzles and repetitive battles of the castle. Right after Fortuna Castle, there's a forest area that once again switches the pacing from slow to relatively fast. With just a bit of tweaking, the forest area could have been a much more appropriate buffer between the first couple levels and the rest of them. I mean, it's not like any of this makes geographical sense anyway. A frozen mountainous castle placed right between a European-styled city and a humid tropical forest. Clearly, these areas were produced independently with little thought of how they fit together, which is a bit disappointing as creating a coherent, immersive world was a design sensibility introduced all the way back in DMC 1. All of these nags could be forgiven if the combat was as appealing as it was back in DMC 3. This is, at least for the first 8 hours, not the case. Nero has a distinct moveset that makes him unique from Dante, most notably in the way he uses his literal demon arm. You can grab enemies, which is a cheap way to deal damage, and you can pull them towards you from across the room, which keeps your combos going for longer. Discovering all the ways you can use your demon arm against enemies is fun and makes fighting each enemy type that much more diverse. Not to mention it can be used as a grappling hook, and as we all know, grappling hooks are just about the most fun game mechanic ever. The Devil Bringer, as it's called, is a fantastic addition that greatly improves the combat and movement.
How profound.
It's magnificent.
However, it doesn't nearly make up for the lack of variety in the form of weapons. Nero only has access to one weapon, the Red Queen. By no means is it bad, but it's mostly just a reskin of Dante's Rebellion sword with a few extra quirks, like being able to rev it up like a motorcycle handle for some powerful combos. But it just isn't enough to keep the gameplay exciting and varied. You enter a room full of enemies and the only emotion you feel is frustration, as you know it'll play out the exact same as the last 5 rooms. The different devil arms in DMC3 apparently added more value than I thought. Chaining together combos from 2 different weapons at once was super fun, and each of the enemies encouraged you to experiment as much as possible to find the quickest and most stylish ways to eliminate them. In comparison, the tweaked style ranking system and the lack of weapons and generally bland common foes makes the first 8 hours not much fun. Also, the bosses in this game are pretty lackluster. They're all visually cool and have fun personalities and interactions with the characters, but none of them ever took more than 2 or 3 tries to defeat, which is definitely a change from the previous games. All in all, they're just too easy.
Hey, don't step up if you're not gonna put up a decent fight.
But, and this is a big ol' but, as soon as Dante takes center stage, the game becomes, well, a Devil May Cry game. First things first, let's recap the story up to this point. Nero has been trying to catch Dante, and it's revealed that the leader of the Order of the Sword, that old guy who Dante killed in the first mission, is both alive and the main villain. Also, for completely arbitrary reasons, Nero is betrayed and his love interest, Kyrie, is kidnapped, becoming a literal damsel in distress. This twist wasn't very hard to predict, honestly, but it probably wasn't meant to be. The villains are fairly generic, which is disappointing after how well Virgil was handled in the previous game. I suppose the whole actually good story thing was just a one-time thing, and it hurts, man.
As with the new ones concerning your demise.
Don't you think that's a little harsh? Killing me because of the way I talk?
I especially hate how they handle the characters of Kyrie and His Holiness. Kyrie has no depth whatsoever. The only reason the player has to care about her is because of her singing at the beginning and a few generic lines of dialogue before she's whisked away to become a shiny set of keys to be dangled in front of Nero to make him really mad because he really cares about her.
Kyrie!
His Holiness, the main villain, is much the same. His motivation is ultimate power, which I suppose is exactly the same as Virgil, but he has few other character traits besides maniacal overlord who is either insane or just a real big jerk. For whatever reason, he's trying to activate a big golem so he can kill all the demons that he himself unleashed into the city. What's the benefit of killing hundreds of your own faithful followers beyond showing off how cool your statue is?
The creation cannot be stopped.
You summon and kill. Summon and kill. I fail to see the logic here. Said it. The price to pay for power?
Anyways, Nero tries and fails to rescue Kyrie and ends up being absorbed by the previously mentioned big statue golem thing, and Dante takes over. This really confused me. At the most important part of the plot, Nero is captured and out of the picture until the very end. This is the first time I've seen a protagonist fail in his mission so hard he has to be bailed out by the protagonist of the previous story, who actually ends up doing the majority of the work. Well, that doesn't make sense from a story structure point of view. The game actually gets way better once you gain control of Dante. Namely because he has access to 3 different weapons and 5, count 'em, 5 different combat styles that you can switch to at will by using the D-pad. In DMC3 there were several different styles you could use, but you had to laboriously switch them at a deity statue. Also, after putting quite a bit of time into each style, they independently leveled up, meaning that switching to a different one that you hadn't spent any time in wouldn't be very useful at first. This meant that the game inadvertently encouraged the player to stick with one style throughout the entire game. The Trickster, which on top of being the most immediately accessible style since it specialized in dodging and jumping, was also the first style the player gained access to. Since DMC3 was such a difficult game, experimenting with different movesets, especially when that meant sacrificing your ability to dodge effectively, wasn't very enticing. Devil May Cry 4 goes above and beyond to fix this. Allowing the player to change styles at literally any time opens up so many avenues. Upgrading these styles is now as simple as buying new abilities in the shop as well, greatly encouraging you to make full use of your moveset. Also, please let's talk about how great Dante is in this game.
Glad I got your attention. I was beginning to feel a little ignored.
This is definitely my favorite depiction of him yet. Suave, matured, but still pretty goofy. His character has really evolved into something spectacular since DMC 1, and DMC 4 is the pinnacle of it all.
You can hide that body, but that smell? Ooh, there's no covering up.
He's so much more interesting than the emotionally unstable Nero.
I swear it! I swear I'm gonna get us out of here! Together, Gideon! Gideon!
Should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
All of these things almost make up for how slow the first 8 hours were. Almost. Well, the combat and character side of things definitely open up after Dante takes the wheel. They seriously botch the levels from this point onwards. Now, I'm all for recycling, reduce, reuse, that kind of thing. But when it comes to recycling levels and bosses in video games for the sake of extending the playtime, I'm not such a big fan. Devil May Cry 4 has you go from a city, a castle, a forest, and a tower, and then the same tower, the same forest, the same castle, and the same city. Once Nero's gone, you go through all the levels, fight all the same bosses, and kill all the same enemies in reverse order until you reach the very beginning of the game. Talk budget or time constraints all you want, this is just embarrassing and annoying. And once you gain control of Dante, the game is almost over anyway, so him being the much more fun character out of the two main ones doesn't matter much in the grand scheme of things. I guess I'll finish the story recap. Dante destroys the Hell Gates, takes Yamato, Virgil's blade, and beats the crap out of the aforementioned big statue until it births Nero so he can finally beat the lackluster main villain and free Kyrie. And everything's wrapped up with a nice little bow on top. It's a good ending, it really is. Even though the story was pretty bad, the ending finishes things off so nicely it just leaves you with a big ol' smile on your face. It's also a more than fitting send-off for the series as a whole, but, well, we don't need to worry about that anymore, do we? Once you finish the game, you've got quite a few options, as always. The Son of Sparta difficulty is your more traditional hard mode, which is the most natural way to go. Or there's Legendary Dark Knight difficulty, which tests you by throwing innumerable enemies in your path. Or you can start a new game as one of the other characters. If you really love the game, there's even a difficulty mode where you die in a single hit, which for some people I'm sure is no problem. Honestly, the things you can do in this game are actually cooler than what characters are capable of in the cutscenes, which is just ridiculous. I'm not sure about the original, but in the special edition you can play as Lady and Trish, or Virgil himself, which is just awesome. Having the option to play through the game as your favorite characters is a really good way to encourage you to replay the game, as it's not just a slightly harder version of exactly what you just did, though that's well implemented too. Unfortunately, unlike Devil May Cry 2, the alternate characters don't add any extra story or levels. It's bare bones, sure, but it's still extra fun content. Devil May Cry 4 is a sequel that tried to be as good as its predecessor, but for whatever reason wasn't able to be. Although it falls short in many instances, the game still stands strong because of the clearly evident passion put into it and the rock-solid gameplay systems that remain from previous incarnations. Although I've been quite harsh on it, I still think DMC 4 is a must-play for anyone who enjoys action games. And in many ways, it's a love letter to the fans who have been playing them for 17 years. It's not a masterpiece, but it gets the job done, and for the most part, does it well. My name is JaBoc, and I hope we meet again.
We were just getting to the best part. I didn't know you were into that kind of thing.
So, are we getting paid for this?
Don't worry. I'll pay you when we get back.
All right. Then let's blow this joint.
Well, at least someone knows how to get the girl.
Yeah. Hey,